Oh, yeah, I love this tea. Is what I need.
You feeling okay?
Yeah, I got a cold.
I was gonna say you feel like you might be fighting off a cold.
I can see the bubbles.
Yeah. Yeah. But I took a long nap. It was nice.
Yeah.
Brennan.
You got it. How old are you?
26.
How old's Hampton?
Hmm?
How old's Hampton? How old is Hampton?
I think he's maybe early 30s. Hey, how you doing, Justin?
Pretty good, how are you?
And 3, 2.
Good evening. Welcome again to ZENtalk. This is the weekly dialogue around Zen practice and training that we hold on Thursday evenings. That doesn't matter to you if you're watching this on YouTube. You can check out our programs at www.asec.org. That's for Atlanta Soto Zen Center here in Atlanta, Georgia. And we'd like to invite you to look at our other programs as well. We have a Tuesday night called Cloud Dharma online. It's done on Zoom these days. And we are discussing Mokurai, which is the second collection of our founder, Matsuoka Roshi's Zen talks that he gave during his tenure here in America. He came over in 1939, lived till 1997, and was one of the founding teachers or pioneers of Soto Zen in America. Soto Zen is that practice that emphasizes upright seated meditation. Dogen, Zenji, Eihei Dogen, you may have heard of. Zenji in Japan, 13th century Japan, is this recognized founder in Japan. And he went to China to learn this. So our practice is really a form of Chinese Zen practice. The first chapter, Jnana, which means something like way amongst the ways, in which Matsuoka Roshi explains the differences between Soto, Rinzai, Obaku, and other forms of practice, and ends up recommending Soto Zen, of course, for Americans. We just completed last week. Then this next Tuesday, this coming Tuesday night, we will begin looking at every day as a happy day in Zen, which is one of the expressions that Matsuoka Roshi would often use. Every day is a good day, every day is a happy day. Somebody asked me later on, and what would I add to that, if anything? And I said, regardless. The hard part is regardless of what's going on. Every day is still a good day, still a good, happy day. We'd like to welcome our guest tonight, Brennan Bass, B-R-E-N-N-A-M, young man who is just becoming a resident here at Atlanta Soto Zen Center. We have a limited residency program here. And I think just beginning your formal Zen or more structured Zen practice. So we'll be asking you some things about that tonight to tell us how you came to this path. A little bit about your background. I understand you're 26, yes. 26 years old.
Yes.
So tell the audience and tell us what is it about Zen that makes you feel attracted to it? In 25 words or less. You can have more than 25
Zen
words.
has a calming effect that has, science. This is all grounded in science. You get physiological benefits for sitting. As long as you don't sit too long and you make your legs turn gangrenous. That's why we do Kinhin walking meditation in between periods of sitting. But it's really, I was attracted initially to just the idea of meditation. And when I began an individual practice, I started to wonder, am I doing this right? as many of us seem to do. So I began to seek out a teacher, and I looked at the Vedanta Center of Atlanta. That's Advaita Vedanta, a Hinduist offshoot, I would call it. I didn't quite find something that resonated with me in that. The idea of non-dualism certainly resonated, but the trappings that came along with Vedanta were not to my preference. So
Tell us a little bit more about those trappings.
Beg your pardon?
Tell us a little bit more about those trappings. Such as
like I was kind of turned off by chanting, by like bhakti, devotional yoga, different schools of yoga. It just seemed needlessly complicated, I should say.
What was the chanting like? Was it in English?
No, it was mainly in Pali or Hindi.
Okay. So when you chanted, did you know what you were chanting?
I had no idea what I was chanting.
So it was kind of,
yeah.
Was that part of what put you off about it?
No. I don't know. It didn't feel quite. I didn't quite settle into it. I guess you could say. I didn't find a comfortable seat there.
You know that we chant in Zen, right?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
We chant in English, but we also chant in Japanese. Not so much, maybe not always, but once in a while we chant in Japanese. It's kind of. Matsuo Orochi said, "The chanting is the meaning of the chanting."
Yeah.
So not so much that we need to know the words. It's a little like the Mass in Latin. It's kind of more mysterious if you don't know what you're saying. But we also chant the same chant, the so-called Heart Sutra. We'll chant that in Japanese and we'll chant it in English. So you do hear both sides. You hear both what it's saying, and you hear it the traditional way that was handed down for many generations. But I think you've hit on something that a lot of Westerners find a little bit alienating. We talk about devil worship and things like that, and we're sitting around in dark outfits chanting in guttural voices. if you see a movie, about devil worship, that's what's going on. So we tend to fall into these cultural ruts that people in this culture at least look at as askance, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think you're talking about something a little deeper.
Well, when I came here to the Zen Center, it was as though there were a resonance.
Resonance?
Yes, a resonance. I guess you could call it a vibe in contemporary terms. Something just kept calling me back. And I don't know if it was just the fact that I had found my seat or what, but I stuck with it, and I began to attend more regularly, and here we are today.
Take us back to when you first started thinking about this, and you started seeking out jnana way amongst the ways. You started looking at different things. How old were you then? How long ago was that?
I developed a way-seeking mind, I would say. Probably when I was about 14 or 15. I found a podcast about Buddhism, and it was kind of this format, except for in reverse. It was a talk and then a meditation rather than a meditation and then a talk. So I listened to that. I tried the meditation, definitely came to the conclusion, I might not be doing this right, and I don't want to do something that I don't know what I'm doing. I don't want to mess myself irreparably.
Yeah.
So
you form bad habits, you can have get into blind alleys and confusion, a little bit of confusion. So what made you decide more recently, first, before we get into that, tell us a little bit about what you do in the secular world. What is not that Zen isn't secular, Zen is not a religion in the ordinary sense. What is it that you do, your education, where were you born? Tell us a little bit about your bio.
Guess we'll
and what you're doing for
start from the
work.
perceived beginning.
Little
I
white
was-
picket fence.
Yep, I was born in Griffin, Georgia. So I'm a native Georgian. I've been here in all my life, and I've been kind of gravitating around Atlanta. And then when I finally struck out on my own and tried, I wanted my own place. I didn't want to live with friends and have roommates. I wanted my own place, and I moved here to Atlanta about 2 years ago.
So native Georgian are kind of an endangered species in Atlanta.
Yeah, really. Pretty normal life. I might have. I feel like I often had the. I'm on the outside and looking in mindset, and I think I let that fall into a habit. So that defined a lot of my actions day to day.
Understood. Tell us a little bit about your education.
I went to Gordon College as a history major, and I dropped out about 3/4 of the way through my first year. And I haven't been back to college. I didn't really find the format pleasing.
So you're joining the Bill Gates of the world.
Yeah, that was kind of the idea at the time, but now it's more or less I'm just kind of doing my thing. And
Well, what do you do in the outside world for employment?
well, I am, we call it like tech field support and technology innovation. So I have my hands on a lot of working pieces. I'm like the finger on the end of the hand, and I do a lot of the touching for the organization that I work for. So I am hands-on with a lot of things. I experience it instead of other people, and I come up with new ways to improve it.
Do you spend a lot of time with users, like in tech support type of thing?
Yes. I'm normally face-to-face with most users.
Yeah. It's a growing field.
Mm-hmm.
It used to be that you'd get a piece of software, usually on a disk. It used to be floppy disk back in my day. And you'd get these huge tomes of documentation that go with them. And you look at these things, they're like Bibles. And it got to be plug and play after a while, where you just plug the thing in and start using it. You would never refer to the documentation until you ran into a glitch or some sort of problem. And so I like to think in Zen, the literature in Zen, the kind of literature that we have in Zen, is a little bit like that. It's if you're not using the application, if you're not sitting in meditation, this is not going to make a whole lot of sense. In Matsuoka's case, it makes sense on different levels. But people try to get Zen from books, right? They try to read and get Zen from books. So I think if we think of it as that kind of metaphor or analogy, unless you're doing the work, unless you're using the app, it's not going to make much sense. But if you're using the application, then the literature can work as a backup, help you find workarounds to glitches. And that's also the relationship that a teacher, I think, has, at least in Soto Zen. It's a more casual relationship, which Matsuoka Roshi refers to here in the first chapter. You can have a long-distance relationship with your teacher. He was in California while I was here, and we were both in Chicago and back and forth Japan and so forth. But I think we who are teachers, who take on the mantle of teachers in Soto Zen, are more like coaches, a little bit like a coach. And as you get into a glitch of some sort in your practice, you can come to your teacher, and they can maybe help you with a workaround about that particular thing. So I think there's a pretty close parallel in terms of how we use digital technology today, and where the online support groups come into play, right? It's mostly intuitive, right?
Yeah.
We're mostly supposed to just use it intuitively and use it the way we need to use it. And I think that's the same for Zen. It's an intuitive process. So tell us a little bit about more when you first confronted Zen here, and what made you decide, other than the vibe, what made you decide to take on the residency, which our residencies are generally 90-day kind of based on the old Ango or practice period in India, the rainy season when the monks would go into the caves for 90 days and get out of the rain, monsoon season. So we go through a process of you're tried out, things are working out. After 90 days, we re-up for another 90 days or however long. We've had people stay here for several years, for years on end. So what made you decide to try, what are some of the things that made you decide to try the residency, do you think?
Well, at first I felt rather, I started feeling lost and confused in my practice.
Confused?
Yes.
That's a holy state.
Well, at the time, I wasn't necessarily concerned with. I don't know. I was very preoccupied.
Preoccupied. Tell us about that.
I read a lot, so I would. I still do. I spend hours just tearing through sutras, tearing through scripture, tearing through.
You're talking about reading a lot about Buddhist.
Yes, Buddhism, particularly Zen, but I enjoy reading Buddhist sutra in general.
What are some of the other kind of things that you like to read?
I love fantasy, sci-fi,
Sci-fi, fantasies.
manuals. I like tech manuals, things like that.
Wow.
I love to read. My mother was a language arts teacher when I was growing up.
Okay.
And she's a teacher for life. I thought that was going to be my path, and I thought I was going to join the Georgia teacher force. That's why I went to school for history. And about halfway through that, I was just like, man, this is the pits. I don't want to be a history teacher. All these college kids around me that I'm going to be teaching the same thing one day. I don't want to do this.
Yeah, I could see that. History, I think, can be creative, but it's probably one of the tougher categories. I found personally and anecdotally, in talking to people who are into Zen, I found there's a pretty high correlation with an interest in science fiction as well. I had friends in high school who were really into science fiction. I had one friend who just had a rack full of all the science fiction books you could get, and that's dating me. I'm going back to the 50s, and there wasn't that much at that time. But I think that maybe because there is a similarity in that the best science fiction, in my opinion, the best science fiction writers take reality as it is, right? And they put a little twist on it. And the reader thinks, that could be true.
Yep.
You don't know for sure it's not true. And in a way, I think Zen or Buddhism does that. It questions reality. And Buddha's teaching come up with this twist on reality. And the Zen teaching of the Chinese and the Japanese ancestors, Korean and so forth. It's just a little tweak, but it's a fundamental tweak that makes all the difference in the world. I think that's the parallel, I think, between really good science fiction and what Zen is pointing out. Do we really understand our reality? Might it be the Matrix, or might it be, that makes sense to you?
It makes perfect sense. In fact, that's why I'm here.
What's the connection like for you? And science fiction tweaks your imagination more than history.
Well, that's
Of course, there's alternative history. That's a new form of science fiction. But that's a new form of politics, too.
Alternative facts, and now we have alternative fact checking. But we're going too deep. But so, but kind of Zen provides a method for checking reality, fact-checking reality each and every moment experientially. And that is why I'm here.
Very interesting. I've never heard it called that. I think fact-checking is really good.
I'm forever the skeptic. I have I call it a healthy doubt now. I used to have this terrible doubt, anxiety, and things like that, and it seems to have waned with my practice.
Well, the old saying is keep your doubt at a keen edge. We think it's important to doubt. faith in Zen is not not blind faith, but it's exercising faith in the face of doubt. See. The next few minutes, why don't you tell us a little bit more about what you have read about in Buddhism and Zen and the most compelling, say, aspects of it that you're still curious about or wondering about, that kind of thing?
Well, the first thing that I read of Zen was the Gateless Gate.
Can you explain a little bit to the audience what the Gateless Gate means? The Mumonkan.
Mumonkoan.
Mumonkan. That's the gate.
That's it.
I think that's Gateless Barrier, the Gateless Gate.
That's a hard one.
Well, what are the things that fascinate you personally about your studies?
Well, it's really just the experiencing words here.
Well, you said fact-checking reality. Maybe you could build on that.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm trying to get at. So I can.
What happens in your meditation?
Everything, a lot. My mind begins to run 90 miles an hour like a bullet train, and I will sit there. I'll be like, okay, well, monkey mind grasps. Monkey mind does what it does. You know, let's give it something to do, and I'll count breath, or
You'll do what?
I will count breaths.
Count your breaths.
Yes. And really, it's just watching what I'm doing, being aware of the bubbles, stream of thought, however you want to put that. It's being aware of what's going on with my current experience. It's sitting with it.
Does it ever get boring?
And after a fashion, yeah, it can get boring. I'll be sitting on the cushion and I'll be like, oh man, how long have I been sitting here? My legs are asleep. And a lot of it'll run. Thoughts will come up when I start to get bored, and then I just kind of bring it right back to center. And it's.
Now you're a musician, right?
Yeah.
And tell us a little bit about your music and what your interest there is.
I love making sounds in general. I think I just
hopefully musical ones.
Everything has a musical nature to it to me. Every little bitty sound does. So I like rock and roll. I like blues, jazz. I like hip hop, R&B, trap music. I think I might cling to sounds a little bit. I love to hear things, but music's my jam.
You're an omnivore of music.
I will eat anything and everything if you put it in front of me.
I noticed we had a breakfast out with Andrew, I think, and you were talking about what was going on in the music, and I realized that I hardly ever even pay attention to the background music, but you were in there naming all the bands.
First thing that I grab onto when I walk into any establishment is, what does it sound like?
Yeah. What do you play? What kind of instrument?
I primarily play the acoustic guitar. I dabble in the electric, and because I love heavy metal and rock and roll, so that's like my bread and butter kind of music. But I like the acoustic guitar because it's versatile, and I have not yet exhausted all the possibilities for playing it.
Well, good luck with that. I come from a jazz family, as you may know, and my dad had a jazz band, and I was exposed to jazz as a child. And I remember going home, and who was it? Who was the band? Oh, I'm losing my memory here, but I took this album home for my dad to listen to, and I said, this young guy was known for being so fast, so fast on the guitar. And it was one of the psychedelic bands. I can't remember. Anyway, they were a jam band. It wasn't Hendrix, no, jam band.
Flotsam and Jetsam? Flotsam and Jetsam?
Oh no. And he laughed, and he put on an album by one of the jazz guitarists. My brother and Dad were kind of dismayed when rock and roll came along because it kind of put jazz in the background.
Yeah.
And there was some famous jazz guitarist who defined rock and roll as a continuity of monotonous sound. That's pretty harsh.
Yeah, that's harsh judgment, but
So where do you want to go with this? Where do you want to go with your music and Zen? And what's the connection for you between music and Zen?
oh man, it seems as though it's like opening the floodgates. When I do Zazen, it doesn't really matter how long I sit and do it. A 10-minute session starts to become the same as a 30-minute session. So after a while, and I can sit for 5 or 10 minutes, and then I'll pick up a guitar, and everything that I was playing, I was going through something stale before. I was playing through a routine, and then I pick it up, and then suddenly it's like new life springs from my fingertips. Sounds that I'm not pre-thinking of them. I'm improvising, so it helps creativity on the fly, I think.
The Holy Grail in Zen or jazz that I picked up from my dad and his associates, my brother, and so on, seemed to be, and Charlie Parker was the outstanding example of this. They'd say, when you get to the point that whatever you can hear comes out through the instrument with no blockage, this is the Holy Grail, right? And Charlie Parker played so fast, of course, heroin inspired and heroin fueled, according to the story anyway. But they've actually slowed his tapes down and shown that the musical structure was very technically correct, even though he was playing at blinding speed. So I got the idea that musical nirvana would be when you sit down at the keyboard or pick up your guitar or saxophone or whatever, and it just clear through, right? It just,
like
whatever you hear comes out.
Like a conduit.
Like a conduit. And there's no technical resistance. That's why they practice so hard to become technically proficient. So there's no physical resistance. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, it sounds a lot like Zazen.
Yeah, I think it's the same thing. And usually most of the resistance in Zazen comes from the same place, right? So we have a few minutes left. Let's turn to the audience and see if what questions we may have here. Anybody have a question for Brennan tonight?
So it sounds like you have some degree of seeking in your background. Did you, aside from the Hindu, did you try other forms of Buddhists? Did you go by the Tibetans?
I looked online. I looked at some places that offered services in Mandarin. I looked all over the place, and something about the simplicity of the Zen Center is what drew me here. Than the simplicity of Zen in itself. I actively looked for the first time in my life when I turned 25. I started looking for a way to practice, a way to deepen my understanding. And of course I found it here, but
So when the student's ready, the center appears.
Yeah.
if you sit, then it will come.
Nice.
Incidentally, Dogen was about 25 when he went to China. Matsuoka Roshi was 27 when he came to America, and I was about 26 when I met him. So I think there's something about the mid-20s, maybe for men only. I'm not sure if it applies to all genders, both genders. That seems to be when you start looking for something more serious. Anyone else?
When you were at breakfast with Sensei, do you remember what the music was?
Yeah, man, it was like 80s hair metal. So I in sequence, I heard "We're Not Gonna Take It" by Twisted Sister. Then I heard "Crazy Train" by Ozzy Osbourne. Then it was like "Youth Gone Wild" by Skid Row. I'm gonna try to go on and on, but I do remember it.
You make me feel old.
Well,
I don't know.
as
these guys.
actively as I study
I know
Buddhism,
Ozzy Osbourne.
I study rock and roll. So
Yeah,
talking
yeah.
about 35-year-old music, isn't it?
I know. I wasn't paying attention.
That's the sad part.
Yeah. But it's the same way. I do a lot of memorization of the Buddhist teachings, and so I have a very clear memory on those. But I think most of it basically is sort of not worth remembering, most of what we have in life.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting that you focus on this and you focus on that. I'm finding a lot of connections between music and Zen and everything else.
I'm still discovering new connections every day.
It's the intersection of, we hear this word a lot these days, the intersection of X and Y, right? So my main interests are in the intersection of Zen and creativity, the intersection of Zen and music, intersection of Zen and writing, you know, how do those come together? Anyone else? Yes.
Yeah, what was your favorite book that you read?
I'm still chewing my way through Shobogenzo.
Shobogenzo is Master Dogen's masterwork. It's nearly 100 fascicles or chapters.
Yep, I believe the edition that I have has 96 chapters.
He was going to write 100, but he didn't live long enough. He only finished 95 of the formal set.
Mm-hmm.
And I've often wondered what the other 5 could possibly have been about.
It seems as though he covers every base.
That's what I mean. It's everything.
So Shobogenzo it became like it was just my daily reader. I just, I would open it up, flip to a page, and whatever chapter we're on, we read the chapter, and that's it that day.
In the liturgy, Genjo Koan out of the Bindoan, Juju Samai, self-fulfilling samadhi, Fukanza Zengi, promotion of Zazen. These are all selected excerpts that are used in liturgy, Soto Zen liturgy. And I've been setting those to music. I found a connection where they're very poetic, most of them, many of them. Also the Chinese. And so I'm finding an exercise, for me at least, where I can combine music and the Zen studies.
I remember doing that one Sunday. We all sat right here, and we had different rhythmic noisemakers. And man, I went back and listened to that on Mixler, and it was awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
do you remember what we did that day? Was it Sandokai?
It was Genjo Koan, actually.
Really?
Yes. Okay. We had to talk about.
That's a long one.
We had to talk about the way, and that's Bindawa for y'all listening. It was awesome for me. I really enjoyed that.
Well, Brennan, we're about out of time. Let's just see if there's anything else.
Will you do another interview in 6 months? Or after, well, not 6 months, but you're at maybe in 2 months after you've been here for 2 months.
Yes.
Yep. What we'd like to do is a follow-up so we can see kind of a before and after in your case, which we don't get that opportunity to see how that works. So anyway, I invite you back to come on and look online. We are on YouTube. We are on the Atlanta Soto Zen Center Facebook page. And we stream live on Mixler for this. Anywhere else?
That's all we can
So
do.
those are the 3 venues in which you can find us. And please tune in again, and please attend if you're in the Atlanta area and plan to come on a Thursday evening. We start the show, such as it is, it's at 7:30, and we have meditation from 6 o'clock until 7:30.
6:30.
6:30 till 7:30. So thanks for being here. Thanks
Thank
for
you
being
for
in the
having me.
interview. And good night. Since you're in different venues, it doesn't make sense to say good night, does it?